You walk into a farmhouse in the middle of July. Outside, it's 94 degrees. Inside, it's 68. No air conditioner humming, no electric bill climbing, no vents blowing, just cool, dry air sitting still like it belongs there. And the family living in that house hasn't paid a cooling bill in over 40 years. That's because they're using something the rest of America was told to forget. A refrigerant so powerful it can pull a room down to 28 degrees below zero. The Amish never stopped using it. The first time I walked into one of these homes outside Mount Hope, Ohio, I stood in the kitchen for 10 minutes just feeling the cold come off the walls, trying to figure out where it was coming from. What I'm about to show you traces back to a patent filed in 1922 by a man named Albert Einstein and his student Leo Szilard. Yes, that Einstein. And if you already own your home, you can use a smaller version of this same principle this summer with parts that fit on a workbench. Now, let me tell you what happened in 1928, because this is the part that nobody talks about. For nearly 50 years, almost every refrigerator and cooling system in America ran on ammonia. Big hotels used it, meat packers used it, farmhouses used it. The Crosley Icyball, sold from 1927 through the mid-1940s, was an ammonia-based cooler the size of a dumbbell. You heated one end on a wood stove for an hour in the morning. You carried it to your icebox. It kept food cold for 24 hours. No electricity, no motor, no moving parts. Penn State Extension still has agricultural records from 1931 describing dairy farms in Lancaster County using ammonia absorption units to keep milk at 34 degrees through August. The system used heat to make cold. Read that again. Heat made the cold. A small flame, a sealed loop of pipes, and ammonia doing the work that today costs you $300 a month. But in 1928, a chemist named Thomas Midgley Jr., working for General Motors and DuPont, invented Freon. And within 10 years, ammonia was pushed out of the American home. Not because it stopped working. It worked better than Freon. It was cheaper. It used less energy. The Department of Energy's own efficiency studies, the ones from 2015, confirmed ammonia is still 17% more efficient than the refrigerants in your central air unit right now. So why did it disappear from your house? Because DuPont owned the patent on Freon. And ammonia, you cannot patent. Ammonia is just nitrogen and hydrogen. Nature made it, nobody owns it. There was no money in letting Americans keep using something free. The Amish, of course, never got the memo. They kept their absorption units, they passed them down. A man I met in Holmes County named Eli, 71 years old, showed me a propane-fired ammonia refrigerator in his summer kitchen that his grandfather installed in 1948, still running. Never been serviced, cools a 6 cubic foot box down to 36 degrees on less than a gallon of propane a week. The principle is called absorption refrigeration. You have a sealed loop containing ammonia and water. You heat one end. The ammonia boils off, separates from the water, travels through a condenser where it turns back into liquid, then passes through an expansion valve into the evaporator. When ammonia evaporates, it absorbs enormous amounts of heat from whatever is around it. That's the cold. Then it recombines with the water and the cycle starts over. No compressor, no electricity, just heat in, cold out. The Serval Company sold these units to American households from 1933 to 1957. Over 2 million were installed. My grandmother had one in her pantry in central Pennsylvania. It ran on kerosene. It outlasted 3 electric refrigerators she bought later. When she died in 1989, the Serval was still working. The kids threw it out because they thought it was old junk. That was the moment America forgot. But here is where it gets interesting for you, because most people watching this think this is something you'd have to install during construction. They're wrong. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. You can buy a modern ammonia absorption refrigerator today. The RV and marine industry kept the technology alive when residential users abandoned it. A unit from Dometic or Norcold, the kind designed for off-grid cabins, costs between $800 and $1,400. It runs on propane, kerosene, or even waste heat from a wood stove. Hook it up in your kitchen, in your basement, in your shed, no electrician required, no permits. In most rural counties, it just sits there and works. But the bigger application, the one that actually cools a room, is what the Amish in Geauga County, Ohio, have been quietly doing for decades. They take a small ammonia absorption unit, the kind designed for a chest freezer, and they run copper tubing from the evaporator coil through the wall into the main living space. The cold liquid passes through that tubing, pulls the heat out of the room, and returns to the unit. One small propane flame, about the size of a candle, cools a 15 by 15 room down into the low 60s on a 90-degree day. A man named Jonas in Middlefield showed me his setup. Total cost, $480. Total monthly fuel cost in summer, about $9. His English neighbor next door was paying $240 a month for central air doing the same job worse. Now listen, what I just walked you through is one piece of a much bigger archive I've been putting together with help from these families. The full collection is called The Complete Field Vault. 3 volumes covering the heating, cooling, pantry preservation, and pest control systems the Amish never let go of. And there's a limited window right now where it's offered at a price I can't promise will hold. It's linked in the description, and there's a QR code on screen if you'd rather scan it. Now back to the part that surprised me most. Because once I understood the absorption principle, I started asking the older men in Holmes County how their grandfathers cooled entire houses before propane was common, and what they told me changed everything. They didn't use ammonia for whole house cooling. They used something simpler, something older, something that costs almost nothing. They used the ground, but not the way the modern geothermal industry tells you. Modern geothermal requires drilling 300 feet down, $20,000 heat pumps, professional installation. The Amish method requires none of that. It uses a principle the USDA documented in Farmers Bulletin number 1572, published in 1927, titled Cold Storage on the Farm. That bulletin described how to maintain 52-degree air year-round using nothing but a buried clay pipe and natural convection. You dig a trench 4 feet deep, 50 feet long, running away from your house. You bury a 6-inch clay or PVC pipe in that trench. One end opens to the outside air, screened against pests. The other end comes up through the floor inside your home. As outside air travels through that buried pipe, the earth pulls the heat out of it. 50 feet of contact with soil at constant temperature is enough to drop 95-degree air down to 60 degrees by the time it enters your living room. The Amish call it a cooling tube. The Romans called it a hypocaust reversed. Cornell University's Agricultural Engineering Department tested this configuration in 1978 and confirmed the temperature drop holds across all soil types east of the Mississippi. The report is still archived. Most people have never heard of it. You can add a small 12-volt fan powered by a single solar panel to increase airflow. Total system cost, under $300. Total operating cost, $0. Lifespan, 50 years minimum if you use proper clay tile. And here is where the suppression becomes obvious, because the HVAC industry knows about this. They have known about it for 100 years, but there is no service contract, there is no annual maintenance fee, there is no filter to replace every 3 months. Once it's in the ground, you owe nobody anything ever again. That's why your father never heard of it. That's why your contractor never offered it. That's why the building inspector in your county will look at you sideways if you mention it. Not because it's dangerous, because it threatens an entire industry. Now, I promised you a finale, and I have kept the best for last, because what I'm about to tell you came from a single conversation with an 84-year-old bishop named Amos in a kitchen outside Sugar Creek, Ohio, last September. He pulled down a leather-bound notebook from a shelf above his stove. The notebook had been his grandfather's. The dates inside ranged from 1898 to 1934. And inside that notebook was a formula, a recipe, written in pencil, for something the old Amish called night water cooling. Here is how it works. You take a shallow metal tray, about 3 feet by 3 feet, 2 inches deep. You fill it with water. You put it on your roof or on a flat platform outside on a clear night. Clear sky is essential. What happens next is a real, measured phenomenon called radiative cooling. The water radiates its heat directly out into the cold of deep space. On a clear, dry night, the water in that tray will drop 10 to 15 degrees below the ambient air temperature. By morning, you have ice-cold water, sometimes literal ice, even when the air temperature never went below 60. The bishop's grandfather collected that water every morning before sunrise. He poured it into a clay jug. He buried the jug in a cool corner of the cellar. By afternoon, when the kitchen got hot, he placed the jug on the floor of a small cabinet with a wooden grate above it. The cold radiated upward, and a wood-handled fan, hand-cranked by a child for a nickel, blew that cold air across the kitchen. A passive cooler, made of a tray, a jug, and a piece of wood, cooling a kitchen on a 90-degree day, documented in pencil in 1903. The science behind it was finally published in a Stanford University paper in 2014. They called it the discovery of passive radiative cooling. They patented variations of it. They are now selling the technology to commercial buildings as a revolutionary breakthrough. Bishop Amos's grandfather knew it in 1903. The Amish never forgot, and now you know it too. You can build this system this weekend. A galvanized tray from any hardware store, $15. A clay water jug, $12. A scrap of plywood, free. Total cost, under $30. Total cooling power, real, measurable, and yours to keep forever. What you just learned was buried, not lost. It was hidden by people who profit from your dependence and preserved by families who never asked anyone's permission to live free. If you are the kind of man who believes that the most important knowledge in this country was quietly pushed aside to protect somebody else's quarterly earnings, you already know what to do next. Tell me in the comments, would you try the night water cooling tray on your roof this weekend, or would you start with the buried cooling tube in your yard? I read every reply, and I want to know which one speaks to you. Drop it below, even just one word. Subscribe if you want to keep recovering what was taken from us, one forgotten system at a time. The next video I am putting together covers the Amish winter heating method that uses a single match per day. A man in Lancaster showed me his stove last November, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. I'll see you in that one. Before I close this out completely, I want to take you back further, because the story of why we abandoned ammonia is not just about one gas or one refrigerator. It is about a deliberate, well-funded, decades-long campaign to convince an entire nation that the simple was dangerous and the complicated was safe. In 1918, the United States had roughly 200 small ice and refrigeration companies. Most of them used ammonia. Some used sulfur dioxide. A handful used methyl chloride. The systems were not perfect. They required maintenance. They required a man who understood pressure gauges and could smell a leak before it became a problem. But they worked. And they had been working since the 1870s in industrial settings, since the 1850s in laboratory settings, and since the 1830s in the experimental notebooks of a man named Jacob Perkins, who patented the first vapor compression refrigeration cycle in London on the 14th of August, 1834. Perkins used ether. He cooled water until it formed ice. He demonstrated it to the Royal Society. And then, like so many inventors before and after him, he died nearly penniless while other men took his ideas and built fortunes. By the 1880s, ammonia had replaced ether in nearly every serious commercial refrigeration installation in Europe and America. Carl von Linde, a German engineer working in Munich, patented his ammonia compression system in 1876. Within 10 years, breweries from Bavaria to Milwaukee were using Linde machines to cool their lagering cellars. Meatpacking plants in Chicago adopted ammonia by the early 1890s. The great Swift and Armor plants on the south side of Chicago ran on ammonia compressors the size of locomotives, and they ran reliably, around the clock, for decades. The men who maintained those machines were union engineers. They earned good wages. They wore clean coveralls and carried wrenches the size of a child's arm. They knew their machines the way a farmer knows his fields. And when something went wrong, they fixed it, because the parts were simple, the principles were understood, and nobody had yet decided that the average American homeowner was too stupid or too clumsy to be trusted with a refrigerant that had a sharp smell. That decision came later. It came in the 1920s, and it came not from engineers, but from marketing men. In 1926, Frigidaire, owned by General Motors, hired a young chemist named Thomas Midgley Jr. to find a refrigerant that could be sold to housewives without warning labels. Midgley was already famous, or infamous, depending on how you looked at it, for having invented tetraethyl lead, the gasoline additive that would go on to poison the air of every American city for the next 60 years. He was, by all accounts, a brilliant man with a particular gift for solving short-term problems by creating long-term catastrophes. Midgley worked with two colleagues, Albert Henny and Robert McNary, in a laboratory in Dayton, Ohio. By 1928, they had synthesized dichlorodifluoromethane, which they called Freon 1,2. It was odorless. It was non-flammable. It was, as far as anyone could tell at the time, completely non-toxic. Midgley famously demonstrated its safety at a meeting of the American Chemical Society in April 1930 by inhaling a lungful of the gas and then exhaling it onto a candle flame, extinguishing the flame and proving, in one theatrical breath, that the gas was both safe to breathe and incapable of burning. The audience applauded, the press wrote it up, and within 5 years Freon had begun its conquest of the American refrigerator. But here is what the marketing brochures never mentioned. Freon was patented, ammonia was not. Freon was manufactured by a single joint venture, Kinetic Chemicals, owned by DuPont and General Motors. Every pound of Freon sold generated a royalty. Every refrigerator that used Freon locked the customer into a supply chain controlled by two of the largest corporations in America. Ammonia, by contrast, could be made by anyone with a basic chemistry setup. It was produced as a byproduct of coal gas manufacturing. It was sold by the barrel for fertilizer. It cost almost nothing. There was no royalty to collect, no patent to enforce, no corporate gatekeeper between the manufacturer and the consumer. Do you see now why ammonia had to go? It was not because ammonia was uniquely dangerous. It was because ammonia was uniquely free. By 1935, Frigidaire, Kelvinator, General Electric, and Westinghouse had all converted their home refrigerator lines to Freon or its chemical cousins. The advertising campaigns were relentless. Magazine ads showed smiling women in pearl necklaces opening gleaming white refrigerators with copy that emphasized safety, modernity, and the elimination of any need to think about what was happening inside the machine. The word ammonia disappeared from consumer advertising almost entirely. When it appeared at all, it appeared in stories about accidents, leaks, and deaths in old, poorly maintained systems. The accidents were real. I do not want to pretend they were not. In 1929, a hospital in Cleveland suffered a methyl chloride leak that killed 125 people. The press, prompted by industry public relations men, lumped methyl chloride together with ammonia and sulfur dioxide under the single ominous label of dangerous old refrigerants. The fact that methyl chloride and ammonia are chemically and behaviorally almost nothing alike did not matter. The narrative was set. By 1940, the American home refrigerator was a sealed Freon unit. By 1950, the American home air conditioner was the same. The window unit that Robert Sherman patented in 1945, the wall units that began appearing in middle-class homes in the early 1950s, the central air systems that swept through new suburban construction after 1955, all of them ran on Freon or its variants. Ammonia was relegated to industrial refrigeration, where the engineers and union men still kept it running quietly in the background, cooling the meat and the beer and the frozen vegetables that fed the country. And then, in 1974, two chemists at the University of California, Irvine, Mario Molina and F. Sherwood Rowland, published a paper in the journal Nature that changed everything. They demonstrated that chlorofluorocarbons, the chemical family that included Freon, were drifting up into the stratosphere and destroying the ozone layer. The chlorine atoms in Freon, once released, would catalyze the breakdown of ozone molecules for decades, opening holes in the protective layer that shielded the planet from ultraviolet radiation. The chemical that had been sold to America as perfectly safe turned out to be one of the most destructive substances ever released into the atmosphere. The Montreal Protocol, signed in 1987, began the phase-out of CFCs worldwide. The industry, having spent 50 years convincing the public that Freon was the only safe refrigerant, now had to find a replacement. They could have gone back to ammonia. The infrastructure existed. The knowledge existed. The Europeans, particularly the Germans and the Danes, had never fully abandoned it, and they were already running ammonia heat pumps in apartment buildings and supermarkets with safety records that matched or exceeded synthetic refrigerants. Instead, the American industry chose hydrofluorocarbons. HFC 134A became the new standard. It did not destroy the ozone layer, but it turned out to be a greenhouse gas roughly 1,400 times more potent than carbon dioxide. By 2016, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol called for the phase-out of HFCs as well. The industry is now transitioning to a new generation of hydrofluorolefins, which carry their own questions about long-term breakdown products and groundwater contamination. Through all of this, ammonia has been sitting there, the same ammonia that Carl von Linde used in 1876, the same ammonia that cooled Bishop Amos's grandfather's milk house in 1903, waiting patiently for someone to remember that it works. And in some corners of the world, people have remembered. In 2019, a Danish company called Advancer installed an ammonia-based heat pump system in a public housing complex in Copenhagen that heats and cools 400 apartments using a single industrial-grade ammonia unit in the basement. The system has had 0 safety incidents in 5 years of operation. It uses roughly 40% less electricity than a comparable HFC system. The Danish government, recognizing that ammonia is what they call a natural refrigerant with 0 ozone depletion potential and a global warming potential of essentially 0, has been quietly subsidizing the transition. You will not read about this in American home improvement magazines. You will not see it on the home shopping channels. You will not find it at your local big box hardware store, where the refrigerant aisle is still dominated by canisters of the latest patented synthetic, sold to you with the same kind of marketing language that Frigidaire used in 1930. Now, let me come back to the Amish, because I want to make sure you understand something about how they think and why their preservation of these old methods matters in a way that goes deeper than nostalgia. When I sat down at Bishop Amos's kitchen table last fall, his wife Sarah brought out a stoneware pitcher of buttermilk that had been kept in their underground spring house. The buttermilk was 46 degrees, which I measured with a small probe thermometer I keep in my truck. The outdoor temperature that afternoon was 81 degrees. The spring house had no moving parts, no electricity, no refrigerant of any kind. It was simply a stone-lined cellar built over a small flowing spring with a heavy wooden door and a vent at the back that drew cool air through the chamber by natural convection. That spring house was dug by Amos's great-grandfather in 1887. It has been cooling food for 138 years. It has never broken down. It has never required a service call. It has never released a single molecule of greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. Amos looked at me across the table and he said something I have not been able to shake. He said, in his quiet way, the English think they have invented progress. But progress is just the name they give to forgetting. I wrote that down on a napkin and stuck it in my wallet. I still have it. The Amish are not anti-technology. This is one of the biggest misconceptions outsiders have about them. They are anti-dependency. Every technology they adopt or reject is evaluated against a single question. Does this make our community more self-sufficient or less? A diesel generator that runs a milk cooler in a barn might be acceptable in some communities because the community can maintain it, repair it, and run it on fuel they could theoretically produce themselves from soybeans. An air conditioner that requires a sealed, factory-charged refrigerant unit, a service technician with proprietary tools, and a continuous connection to the public electrical grid is not acceptable, not because it is electrical, but because it creates a dependency that cannot be unwound. This is the lens through which they preserved ammonia cooling, evaporative cooling, ground source cooling, and radiative cooling. Every one of these methods can be built, maintained, and repaired by a man on his own land using materials he can source within 100 miles of his home. That, more than anything else, is what was stolen from the rest of us. Let me give you another example that I do not think I have mentioned yet. In Bishop Amos's settlement, there is a family named Yoder. and the Yoders run a small dairy operation that produces about 200 gallons of milk per day. They have to cool that milk from the cow's body temperature of approximately 101 degrees down to 38 degrees within a window of about 2 hours, or the milk will not pass quality inspection when the bulk truck comes to pick it up. 200 gallons of milk dropping 63 degrees in 2 hours is a substantial cooling load. In an English dairy, you would do this with a stainless steel bulk tank that uses an electric compressor and roughly 4 to 6 kilowatts of continuous power during the cooling cycle. The Yoders do it with a system that combines spring water pre-cooling, an ammonia absorption chiller running on propane, and a stratified storage tank insulated with 12 inches of compressed straw. I watched the entire cycle one morning in October. The milk left the cows, ran through a stainless plate cooler where 48-degree spring water dropped its temperature to about 60 degrees, then entered the bulk tank where the ammonia absorption unit, the same kind of unit Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard patented in 1930, pulled it the rest of the way down to 38 degrees. The propane consumption for the entire 2-hour cycle was approximately 1.5 gallons. At current propane prices, that is about $4 of fuel to cool 200 gallons of milk. The English dairy down the road, running on grid electricity, pays roughly $7 to do the same job, and that is only when the grid is up. During the ice storm of February 2021, when power was out across central Pennsylvania for 3 days, the English dairy lost its entire output. The Yoders did not lose a drop. That is what self-sufficiency looks like in practice. That is what the ammonia absorption cycle, invented in 1858 by a French engineer named Ferdinand Carré, can still do in 2024 if you know how to build it. Carré, by the way, is another name you should remember. He patented his ammonia absorption refrigeration system on the 28th of December 1859. By the time of the American Civil War, Carré machines were being smuggled through the Union blockade into Confederate ports, where they were used to make ice for hospitals and for preserving food in besieged cities. After the war, Carré machines spread across the American South, and by 1880 there were over 3,000 of them operating commercially in the United States. Most of them ran for 40 years or more on minimal maintenance. The few that survived into the 20th century were scrapped during World War II. Metal drives melted down for the war effort and replaced after the war with Freon units that lasted maybe 15 years before requiring replacement. The economic incentive for the appliance industry was obvious. A machine that lasts 40 years is a machine you sell once. A machine that lasts 15 years is a machine you sell 3 times in the same period. And a machine that uses a patented refrigerant that must be recharged by a licensed technician every 5 to 7 years is a machine that generates revenue for the entire industry every step of the way. I am not telling you any of this to make you angry, although I understand if you are. I am telling you this because the path back is not closed. The knowledge is not gone. The materials are still available. The principles still work, just as they worked in 1859 and 1903 and every year since. Let me walk you through one more system that I think every man watching this video should at least consider, because it requires almost nothing and it solves a real problem that almost every household faces during summer power outages. It is called a Zier pot. It comes from the Sudanese desert, where it has been used for at least 700 years to preserve food without electricity. A Nigerian teacher named Mohammed Ba Abba reintroduced it to the modern world in the 1990s, and his work won the Rolex Award for Enterprise in 2000. The design is so simple that I almost feel foolish describing it, but the cooling effect is real and measurable. You take 2 unglazed terracotta pots, one slightly smaller than the other. You place the smaller pot inside the larger pot. You fill the space between them with sand, about 1.5 inches thick on all sides. You saturate the sand with water. You cover the top with a damp cloth. The water in the sand evaporates through the porous walls of the outer pot, drawing heat from the inner pot as it goes. The inner chamber stabilizes at a temperature roughly 20 to 25 degrees below the surrounding air temperature, depending on humidity. In a Pennsylvania summer with 85-degree days and 60% humidity, the inner chamber will sit at about 62 degrees. That is cold enough to keep eggs, butter, cheese, and most vegetables fresh for a week or longer without any electricity at all. Bishop Amos's wife, Sarah, uses a Zier pot on her back porch during the hottest weeks of August. She calls it her summer cellar. She keeps tomatoes in it and cucumbers and the small wax paper wrap packages of fresh goat cheese she buys from a neighbor on Tuesdays. The pot has been sitting on her porch for 11 years. It cost her, she told me, the equivalent of about $18 in materials. $18, 11 years, no electricity, no moving parts, no service calls. Now, I can already hear some of you saying, well, that is fine for a few vegetables, but what about a real refrigerator? What about a freezer? What about cooling an entire house? And the answer is that these small systems are not meant to replace a modern refrigerator one for one. They are meant to give you options, to reduce your total dependency, to make sure that when the grid goes down, or when prices spike, or when supply chains break, you are not standing in your kitchen helpless while your food spoils. The Amish do not rely on any single cooling method. They layer them. The spring house handles bulk dairy and root vegetables. The Zier pot handles short-term storage of small items. The ammonia absorption chiller handles the daily milk cooling. The buried cooling tubes handle the bedroom temperature in summer. The Nightwater radiative cooling handles the bulk thermal load of the house during heat waves. The ice harvested in February and packed in sawdust in the ice house handles emergencies and special occasions. No single system has to do everything, because no single system was ever asked to do everything. That is the difference between an English household and an Amish household. The English household has one machine that does it all, and when that machine fails, everything fails at once. The Amish household has 6 or 7 systems, each one solving a specific problem, each one independent of the others, each one repairable by the man who owns it. That is resilience. That is what we used to have before we traded it away for the convenience of a single button that says cool on the wall. I want to end with one more story, and then I am going to let you go. In August of 2003, a heat wave struck Europe and killed approximately 70,000 people. France alone lost over 14,000 citizens, most of them elderly, most of them in apartments without air conditioning, most of them in the cities of Paris, Lyon, and Marseille. The deaths were preventable. They were caused by a combination of unprepared building stock, an over-reliance on a power grid that buckled under demand, and a population that had forgotten how to cool their homes without electricity. In the same heat wave and the same temperatures in the rural alpine villages of Switzerland and Austria, the death toll among the elderly was statistically insignificant. The reason was not that those villages had better air conditioning. They had less. The reason was that the buildings themselves, many of them 300 and 400 years old, were designed for passive cooling. Thick stone walls, deep eaves, north-facing sleeping rooms, cellars connected to the living spaces by interior stairwells that drew cool air upward. Operable shutters that blocked the afternoon sun. Cross-ventilation patterns that flushed hot air at night. The old technologies, the technologies our great-grandfathers understood, saved lives in 2003 that the new technologies could not save. And the same will be true in 2025 and 2030 and every year after. As the grid grows more fragile and the summers grow hotter and the cost of synthetic refrigerants continues to climb, you do not have to become Amish to benefit from what the Amish remember. You do not have to give up your modern refrigerator or rip the air conditioner out of your window. You only have to add 1 or 2 of these systems to your home as a backup, as a complement, as a hedge against the day when the easy systems stop being easy. Build the Zier pot this weekend, $18, one afternoon of work. Dig the buried cooling tube next month, $200 in PVC and a weekend with a shovel, or a few hours with a rented trencher. Set up the Nightwater radiative cooling tray on your roof when the first heat wave hits. $30, one trip to the hardware store. Look into ammonia absorption refrigeration if you have a propane line or a wood stove. The serval units made between 1,933 and 1,957 are still available on the secondary market. I have seen them sell for between $400 and $1,200 depending on condition. Some of them are still running on their original ammonia charge after 80 years. A man in Iowa rebuilt one for his off-grid cabin last year and sent me photographs. The unit is now in its 91st year of service. It cools a 5 cubic foot freezer compartment and a 12 cubic foot refrigerator compartment on roughly 1 pound of propane per day. 91 years, 1 pound of propane per day, 0 service calls, 0 refrigerant replacements, 0 dependency on the grid. That is what we gave up. That is what was taken from us in exchange for the convenience of not having to think about how our food stays cold. Bishop Amos and I sat on his front porch as the sun went down that October evening, and I asked him one final question. I asked him what he would tell a young Englishman who wanted to learn these old ways but did not know where to start. He thought about it for a long time. He watched the cows coming up from the lower pasture, he listened to the windmill creaking over the well, and then he said, "Tell him to start with one thing. One. Pick the simplest system that solves a real problem in his life and build it. Do not try to learn everything at once. Do not try to become a different man overnight. Just build one thing with his own hands that does not depend on anyone else. And then build another, and then another. After 10 years, he will look around and realize he is free." I drove home that night with those words rolling around in my head, and I have been trying to live by them ever since. So that is my offer to you. Pick one, build it this month. Tell me in the comments which one you picked, and send me a picture when it is done. I will feature the best ones in a follow-up video next spring. I want to see what you build. I want to see the country waking up, one tray and one tube and one pot at a time.